Okay, we're live.
Great. So to get started, basically what we are going to do today, I think, is the problem statement is what we see in the title: securing SSH connections to cloud VM running Ubuntu Linux. And we'll try to build attacks and defenses by following some kind of a structured approach and using MITRE ATT&CK to look for attack and defense information. The first step normally is to identify your entities. If you got a chance to look through the ADM Builder's Guide, that's like the first step in the introduction. There it basically says any problem statement tends to have entities that interact. That's the reality of a software industry. So you should first just list your entities and connections. In this case, it's normally your SSH server and some kind of an SSH client. And then you have an encrypted connection that SSH itself sets up. Doesn't matter whether you have a certificate or not, SSH takes care of doing that for you. So step one is basically list your entities, if we can add to this document.
Okay, so list your entities.
Entities and flows.
Entities and flows.
Yeah.
And we said entities. We have SSH client.
SSH client and SSH server. And the flow is your SSH protocol or encrypted SSH connection. Yep. So when you start looking for information, you have to look for information for each of them. Normally, the next step is a bunch of security topics. So if you look at my builder's guide, there are in total 65 general topics that will apply to any kind of an analysis. This spans across your entire stride category plus some level of network security.
Should I bring up the builder's guide? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, if you can, yes.
Okay. Just drag that into this screen.
Yep. Yeah. So if you see, these are a bunch of general topics, stuff like user authentication. Some of these may not apply depending on your scenario. For example, multi-factor authentication cannot be done with plain old SSH connections. But if you have some other tool that does SSH for you, you can put multi-factor authentication, SSO, and all of that on top. So typically what I tell everybody is go through this list and pick the ones that apply to your problem statement and just copy them somewhere. Now, in the interest of time, I would just say copy a few of them, like 4 or 5. You can pick and choose which ones you are interested in. And TJ, you can have a different list from what Rod has. So, since it is the interest of time, if you have a slightly different list, it's easier for us to compare and discuss.
Okay, so step 2 is choose your security topics.
Yeah, choose security topics that apply to your entities and flows.
Apply to your entities and flows. So for me, I'm going to choose user authentication as my first one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna pick unique credentials.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as ow.
Let's see. How about restrictions on failed logins and auto lock after. No, it probably doesn't necessarily apply.
Actually, I would argue that it would, just because of what I was reading with this remote service
Okay.
hijacking. If you don't want that one, I'll grab it.
Oh no, I'll pass on that one. I'll use different user accounts configured on your application service host OS. That one.
Mhm.
And
I'm going to pick 14 using host intrusion monitoring.
Yeah. So you can go to the next pages also. Like there are 65 items on the list, so you can start from the end if you want.
about security and communication interface now and protocols. Or here, generating logs to contain enough forensic. I'll pick the logging one, this one, and then
I'm grabbing number 26. Session management, session timeout mechanism technologies used for maintaining a session and its integrity. Oh, and then 43 goes right along with that. So, Vinay, did you just? I know on this list you say your inspiration was ANSI ISA alphabet soup. Did you read through that and just break it down, or did you just went, okay, hey, here's 65 things off the top of my head?
So I use that as an inspiration because it breaks things down into stride and network security. Now, that document was created by industrial automation companies to secure their systems. Like you deploy them in refineries, you deploy them in manufacturing plants, and so many critical infrastructure systems. And that has always been my go-to document when I look for security requirements or some kind of starting point for security. So what I did then was pick that up and start thinking about what I have worked on till now in my 8 years of security, and break them down one level deeper uh, into specific smaller topics. If you see, each of these will map to one requirement. Normally, a bunch of these would map to a single requirement there. And the reason I made this kind of a separation was the requirement is worded to be very generic. For somebody who's not used to looking at industry standards documentation, it's really confusing. Like I've had experience with junior engineers just giving me the document back saying, I can't understand this. You have to walk me through it. So that's why I put these 65 topics in place for people who have never had experience with such documentation.
All right, I got my last two. Control V. 1, 2. All right, I got 7 things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So to start with, SSH itself, so step 3 is basically looking for sources. So in the document at the end, I have put like 4 sources: MITRE ATT&CK, Google search, sometimes ChatGPT and Copilot can also help you.
Copy that over. Vinay, have you had, so one of the things that I found, the OpenCRE, they work together with OWASP to build a chatbot. It's opencre.org/chatbot. And it's trained on all of OpenCRE's framework. And it'll straight pull CVEs and everything in whenever, if you're asking a question about upgrading something, it's a pretty decent source for finding common vulnerability errors.
Okay, in that case, I think we should add that to the list. Is this the right one?
Yes, sir. opencre.org/chatbot.
Okay. We can probably use that here during our exercise. I would probably put it immediately around MITRE ATT&CK so that we have more focused sources before we go for Google search.
One more focused sources before going to Google.
So what I normally do with MITRE ATT&CK is I just go with the search box and start looking for topics. Sometimes it can be just the technology. So I would say SSH and it will give me a lot of stuff. Or I can say SSH user authentication. So I include the topic with a very, include the problem statement with a very specific topic in your list. And maybe you'll get more focused information. Yeah.
So just pick any number of one of these that come up.
Yep. Many a times I'll have to go through all of them to make sure I have captured all my attacks and defenses. Normally, I use this as the first source for attack because my defense may sometimes depend on the product I'm working on. For example, the way I do defense on AWS may be different from a bare metal server I'm actually running in our own data center. The specifics may differ, so I normally use this as the first step for attack search.
For the purposes of the exercise that we're doing now, would we want to just copy the title or the link or?
So you'll have to look at the documentation and define one attack step, like attack block.
Okay. So like in this one, it says adversaries may modify SSH authorized keys to maintain persistence.
Yes.
So essentially, I'm an attacker. I add my SSH key.
Mm-hmm. So your attack step is probably adding SSH key. But because that requires me to already have access into the system, you can put a given statement saying a given attacker has access to the system.
I'm just going to save this so I have it.
Yeah. Normally in my ADM code, I put it as a comment on top of the attack block so that I know where I got the information for my attack. So tomorrow, if I'm reading it, maybe 6 months down the line, I know that I can go back to the source to just read up a little more if I've forgotten why I wrote this attack.
Mm-hmm.
That is a brilliant idea.
Mm-hmm.
So similarly, if you want to pick one attack each for the remaining list of topics, we'll at least have like 4 or 5 attacks that you can start writing defenses for.
So, like for writing the attacks, like if we roll down a little bit, it goes with procedure examples, and then it lists off in this example here 5 different hacker groups that have attacked.
Yeah. So depending on your exact context, sometimes you may want to capture the hacker group information. Let's say you're working for the government, and the governments tend to be targeted by nation state actors. At that time, you may want to record the hacking group's name, because that makes a little more sense when you're reporting it out to the government. But for companies, sometimes they don't care about who the group is. They just care about securing themselves.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So context may drive some of the differences in the way you capture information.
Okay. So let me go ahead and different user accounts configured in your application host service.
So you can look for SSH, different users, or multiple users, some variation of your search term.
Try different users.
Different users or multiple users. When I say different users, normally that means the server has more than one user account that they support. So probably this is a common server. The scenario probably is you have a bunch of system admins, and each admin has their own account, and all of them have an account on the server that they are managing. So you can look for SSH multiple user or something like that.
Multiple users. Maybe just, I'll try users plural.
Maybe, yeah.
Oh, here we go. Log on sessions. Log on session.
Have appropriate positions in their roles too.
So if you look at the techniques, the second and third one probably are relevant to your scenario, where if when you have multiple users, you can use jump boxes. That's one. Or if you have multiple users, if they have a lot of privileges overlapping, you just have to compromise one user to basically gain full admin rights on the system.
So would the given be like, given that there are multiple users on a
Server or
server,
yeah, on the VM, yeah.
so I compromise another account for,
Let's assume logging is in control of one account while changing application settings. Let's say you're running some kind of an application on that VM, maybe a web server to do something. So the admin who gets to control the web server is different from the admin who gets to control the logging system on the same server. Now, as an attacker, if you want to really hide your tracks, you need both accounts, because if I just compromise the web server, the logging system is still recording everything that you're doing.
yes.
So as an attacker, if I want to hide my tracks, I have to now target this other admin using social engineering or whatever it is. That increases the complexity and the cost for me to attack a system.
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. It's like, and even if you have those different accounts as like a run as account for the web server and a run as account for an agent collecting logs, yeah, and they're not named in such a way where you're able to derive who owns it,
Yeah.
makes it even, I imagine, makes it definitely even harder.
Yeah. So in security design, you have these two principles called separation of duties and least privilege. This basically connects into that.
So this would be the countermeasure, right? So given, if I go back to this, let me just grab. I grab this, write a new attack. Right, so here's my source. Given that a server has multiple accounts.
Yeah.
The attack would be to compromise.
So compromise of all the accounts is required to gain full control of the server.
Okay. Let me go to the next one. Let's try something with logs.
Yeah. You can just look for SSH logs and it should be able to give you something.
Let's do this one. So for our purposes, we could potentially look at this, right? Like, even though this says monitor for API calls, could we say monitor for SSH connections or monitor just generally? It's been a while, but go ahead.
If you actually go down a bit, there is an enterprise section under which you have account manipulation. Yeah. So if you scroll down a little more, 1098 T1098 under enterprise.
098. Okay.
Yep.
Indicated with modifying account saying, okay. So okay, sorry.
In this case, I think they are talking about some kind of a process trying to modify the keys that are authorized for SSH automatically without somebody knowing it. That can be one, but it's not really talking about logging. So I'm not sure whether this would be a good one, because the other option was remote services. Under that, there was SSH as a separate topic.
You're saying down lower there was a SSH as a separate topic, or you're talking about this one?
No, not this one. When you search for it,
yes,
there was one more that popped up, right?
So go back to the search then, right? SSH logs. Remote services SSH, this one?
Yeah. But this seems to be more about login than logs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we can talk about is probably an attack to modify SSH logs itself. Normally, when you SSH in, there is actually a bunch of logs that it records. Give me a second. So, yeah. So even under detection, if you go in the same page here, the first entry talks about auth.log. So if you keep going down, there's a detection section under there.
Mitigation. Oh, yes. Yeah.
So the very first entry has this file that they point to, var log auth.log.
Yes.
This is where normally all your authentication history is recorded, like which login authenticated at what time, and a few more items. So you can create an attack that basically tries to manipulate this or delete this file.
As in a way to cover your tracks, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So if we go back, let's copy this. Let's go back to this. So maybe given that an attacker has access to
Access to the
system,
server.
delete the, and we could just put the path of that file, right?
Yeah.
Delete these two files. Okay. And the idea is to remove traces of, or remove any indications of attacker activity, attacker login, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's pick one more, because I just want to also be mindful of time. So auditing default settings and default security. So I'll try SSH audit. See what comes back. Audit. See if we go down here.
You can look for audit or configuration. Audit normally also means logging, so it may not show you. Or SSH config.
Okay. Yeah. There we go.
Yeah.
Let's do this first one. See.
So if you look for config in this page, it should show something to you.
Should I just search for SSH maybe? See if there's something here.
Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah, it's basically taking you to SSH D config. But even otherwise, without looking at MITRE ATT&CK, you can think of a few SSH configuration attacks where the SSH D_config itself is not locked down. So normally in Linux, you have file system rights for user, group, and everybody else, right? RWX, that's what you see when you do ls-l. If you haven't locked your keys, authorized keys directory, or your SSHD config, anybody on that server can access it. And normally your virtual machines don't just run SSH. Normally they'll be running a bunch of production servers or production applications. And SSH is just there for the admin to get in to troubleshoot a production issue. So what happens is, if you haven't locked down the config files for SSH, and if your application has a problem or a vulnerability, somebody can get in through the application, modify the SSH config, and basically gain persistence again.
So that modify the SSHD or
SSHD_config, yeah.
_config to maintain persistence.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So should we, now that we have these four, Vinay?
Yeah. So what you need to do now is put them into proper ADM structure. So you open your editor and create attack with all the three statements.
Okay, let me go ahead and do that. And okay, so I want to go to dev.
So while you were pulling up your editor, I actually went to opencre.org, and that's also a pretty nice source for you to ask generic questions instead of looking at MITRE ATT&CK with generic search terms and trying to filter through it. It looks like opencre.org tends to do a better job at filtering results for you. So do you have the
Okay,
workspace?
what I'm going to do is.
Go ahead.
Oh, I know what you're saying. You want me to go ahead, go into the workspace? Yeah, sorry. Let me do that. It's actually, I think I just downloaded workspace. It was just a directory called workspace. Yeah, let me find that. Sorry, I thought I had it handy.
Or you can just create a new directory and git clone that.
Yeah, let's
Probably,
do that.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Okay.
I don't know if it's the way that I'm thinking about it right now, but it's almost like when this list of 65 things are almost they're popping into my head as mitigations for because like I'm looking at I went to OpenCRE and just put in what was my prompt, remote service session hijacking, SSH hijacking, and it gave me back 3 ways that it could be carried out: man in the middle attacks, password brute force, and key compromise. But when I look over here at my sheet, like I picked unique credentials for each user that could prevent a key compromise.
Yes.
The restrictions on failed logins and auto lock can restrict the brute force attack, and host intrusion monitoring and session management can prevent the man in the middle attack. So it's just for me, I guess, learning the proper, because I'm so new to this, learning the proper way to go about a man in the middle attack, so that I can learn to model that properly.
Yes. So, like you said, these topics were written from a defenders or mitigation perspective. The fact is, attacks keeps changing. Even if you have mitigations, there'll be new attacks that come in just to circumvent those. So this was used just as a starting point to look for specific information. Like you said, as soon as you look for unique user credentials, you'll start searching for attacks that can break user credentials, or you can talk about default credentials. So this is just to get your brain started on thinking of different possibilities. As in when you start looking at OpenCRE and MITRE attack, you will start going down a rabbit hole of attacks where you'll find a ton of possible attacks that you may not have thought of.
Yeah,
Because
just on the very first page of this and MITRE attack with the SSH hijacking, I didn't realize that once you got in, that you could just bounce from, if they get in, they could just bounce from port to port, or socket to socket rather. I'm like, wow, that is wild.
yes, because we all come from the defense side of the story, we are more comfortable reading through defensive details or defensive topics. But many a times, what defenders don't know is what are the attacker's capabilities and what are the things they know that we probably haven't looked at. So just by triggering our thoughts using a defensive topic, you'll start looking for all possible attacks. So what you normally do is like how Rod has done like 4 scenarios. You basically translate it into specific attack specification. We can probably pick one in the interest of time and add it to our model.
Let's see how this works.
Hey, Vinay, I have to drop. Could we schedule a time before Friday and just continue where we left off here?
Yeah, we can. Sure.
Yeah, and what I'll do in the next session is I'll have my workspace up and running, and then I'll take these 4 that I have and I'll translate them to ADM, and then they'll use that as a starting point.
Yep.
Does that sound good?
Yep. And the other attack path scenario overview document that you have just before you leave, in the appendix, I've put an actual ADM code where I went through MITRE attack to fish for some information. So just as an example, if you scroll down to the end, yeah. So if you scroll down, if you see, I put a reference to what MITRE said, and through MITRE attack, I actually found a research paper on kaida.org where basically they were talking about how people scan the internet for vulnerable systems.
Mhm.
So they were talking about uh, organized crime group and their mechanisms. So you'll see a bunch of attacks based on that research paper. So you can use a similar mechanism when you are looking for information.
No, this is then definitely helpful. I'll have a little bit more set up.
Yeah.
What would be the best day next week to set up time with you? Given it's a short week,
Yeah.
would you be open to Wednesday afternoon potentially?
Give me a second. So next week, Wednesday afternoon, 3 to probably a little before 4 is fine, because
Okay.
after 4 I have another meeting. You are probably part of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No, I think.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
3 to 4 works for me on Wednesday.
Okay. TJ, how about yourself? Wednesday, 3 to 4.
Wednesday, 3 to 4. Yeah, as long as it's not snowing, I'll throw the kids outside or upstairs.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Vinay.
Yeah, Vinay, thank you. I've learned so much today.
No problem. And if you have questions in the meantime, feel free to drop it on Discord and we can collaborate over chat if you want.
Okay.
Yes,
Sounds
sir.
good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.